Hello everyone and welcome to CourseWeaver's authoring tutorial videos for the LON-CAPA system. In this video we're going to look at creating a problem with a graph that will display a simple function, which LON-CAPA can then randomize so that each student will receive a different version of the same graph. Let's jump into our author space and get started. I'm going to create my problem once again in my practice problems folder. I'm going to select new problem and let's give it a title, graph practice. Continue. Let's scroll down. Let's look at a numerical problem. And I want to choose one. Let's see. Looks like curve plot with numerical response. Let's look at it. What is the amplitude of the function? Great. This seems like it'll work just fine. Let's choose this. Create problem. And it looks like I'm already set up with a graph and a simple function. Let's jump into the colorful editor and see if we can't figure out what's going on. Okay, I see a script block, which I already know. I see a new plot. Okay, that's something I'm not certain of. Oh, it's pretty big. I see a text block, which we already know, and I see a numerical response with an answer set to the variable amplitude. Oh, okay. I think if I look back in my script block, I see, oh, here's the variable amplitude. That's our answer. Okay, great. Well, let's start breaking this apart and see if we can't figure it out. I'm going to start by zooming in a little bit so we can see a little more of what's going on. I see in my script block I have three variables. I see amplitude, omega, and a function. Amplitude is equal to a random number between 5/10 and 3 5/10 with an increment of 5/10. Okay. I see omega is also a random number between 1 and 2 with an increment of 5/10. And I see our function is amplitude times the sine of omega times x. Great. Let's scroll down and see if we can't figure out what this next item is. This is the actual GNU plot. I see a lot of options here. Brief description of the plot, color of the image, foreground color, the height, the width. Quite a few. I see only these ones have our values put in. It looks like the background color has been chosen as white. The height is 300 pixels. The width is 300 pixels. So here's how we can adjust how big the graph will be displayed in our problem. And I see a lot of other options, and we're not going to get to all of those today. Let's look at the options that are currently being used. I see the color of the grid lines is black. Okay, good. I see a minimum x value of -5, maximum of 5. And the y is -4 and +4. Looks like we can adjust what part of our graph is being shown. I see a label for the x-axis. I see a label for the y-axis. And now I see our curve. So this must be our function. Color is black. We give it a name. I don't see any values yet. Ah, here we go. The new plot compatible curve function. This is our variable of function. Let's quick jump back up and see. Variable function is amplitude times sine omega times x. Okay, it looks like here's where we would put our function, and that's where it's going to be displayed. Let's make a couple changes and see what we can do here. First of all, when I give graphs to my students, I like them to look a little bigger. This is kind of small. We'll jump back to our save and view, see how it looks. Okay, it's about this big. And let's jump back in here and let's increase our, first of all, I'd like the width to be about double that. I'm going to change it to 600. And then we change the height to about 400. And let's save and view. Ah, perfect. Now let's jump back, and I want to change what part of the graph my students can see. I don't really want them dealing with negative integers right now, so I'm going to change the minimum x value to 0. I want to change the max to 10, and let's see how that shifts our graph. And so here we see our graph starts at 0, goes all the way to 10. Let's hit a couple new randomizations. Okay, perfect. We can see our amplitude is changing, our omega is changing, and we're looking pretty good. So now that we've changed some of the more simple aspects, like the width and the height of the graph, we've changed which parts of the graphs are shown, let's look at maybe changing something a little bit more challenging. Let's add a second function to our graph. I see a sine function. Why don't I add a cosine function? So let's jump back into our colorful editor. I see my function here. Let's zoom in. If I want to create a cosine function, I can use the function I've already got. Let's copy, paste, and let's simply change this to cosine. Let's change our function here to function 2. And now we've got a cosine function and a sine function, and both are going to use the same omega and the same amplitude. But to actually get that function to show up, we're going to need to go all the way down here. Let's look at our curve. We're going to need to add another plot curve. So let's click plot curve. Let's go save and edit. Scroll down. Okay, here it is, our second plot curve. And I see LON-CAPA has already added in some areas for us to input data. Now, I don't want to input data to make my graph. I want to instead input a curve function. So I'm going to delete my 2 data spots, and I'm going to add in a curve function. This is where I'll be able to simply put in the curve function I want it to display. So I click Save and Edit, scroll back down, and so now let's add in our function 2, and let's give it a color of red so we know the difference between the two. And let's save and view. Let's zoom out a little bit here. And here we go. We have our sine function and our cosine function. Perfect. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, please contact us at info@CourseWeaver.com.